We're about to hear from Alison Entsminger, an Austin-based designer at IBM, and she's going to help us understand how to empower our new employees starting day one. Let's welcome Alison.
Imagine a software company growing their numbers through frequent hiring and acquisitions. The new recruits are then dispersed across the company's wide range of products. How would you equip these recruits for success on their new teams? I'm Alison Entsminger, and in my time at IBM Design, I've seen a lot of people struggle as they're put on domains and teams they know very little about. Here's what I did to solve this problem and how you can tackle this on your own teams. But first, let me give you a little bit of my IBM Design backstory. IBM works to solve complex problems. We build software tools for rapidly changing companies, security, analytics, healthcare, you name it. IBM needs to know where each market is going so they can disrupt it before their competitors. Here's where designers like me come in. IBM saw design thinking with its focus on user needs as a way to reinvent their approach to software. Over the past 5 years, designers have been pouring in from all different backgrounds. But you can't build a product you don't know for a user you've never met against a competition you've never heard of. When designers are unfamiliar with the domain, how do you keep them from being lost and unable to contribute? Take me, for example. I studied print design in school, so imagine my confusion working on cloud infrastructure, on block, object, and file storage. I had never worked with developers before IBM, much less built products for them. I was struggling, drowning in jargon and unsure who to ask for help. And that little blonde one, that was me. As I came up for air, I heard similar stories from other new IBMers, unsure how they related to their teams and their products. But this isn't just an IBM or tech industry problem. Most businesses struggle to find the time and resources to bring their new recruits up to speed. Around this time, you might be asking yourself, what does this have to do with me? Well, more than you might think. So by show of hands, who has ever joined a new team before? Great, lots of hands. Who's ever had someone join their team? Awesome, look at how many hands we have out there, pretty much everyone in the audience. So now we need to realize that at some point in our career, we're gonna be on both sides of this onboarding process. And it's something for us all to be aware of. Teams need their new recruits to hit the ground running, and fast. But most employees aren't fully bought in from day one, using the first 6 months to decide whether they'll stay at a company long term. And the first 3 to 6 months are the most critical. One study found that the average company is losing 1 in 6 of their new hires each month for the first 3 months. 23% of those leaving said that receiving clear guidelines to what their responsibility were would have helped them stay at their job. 21% said they wanted more effective training. And 17% said that a simple smile or helpful coworker would have made all the difference. About 1/3 of the new hires that quit said they barely had any onboarding or no onboarding at all. And 15% of respondents said that the lack of effective onboarding contributed to their decision to quit. So when expectations aren't clear, new hires feel isolated from their coworkers and aren't able to make meaningful contributions to the product, with many leaving the team and the company as a result. But what if you could address the reasons people leave before they became issues? Training new hires will help you produce efficient teams, employee retention, and better products. So in today's market of constant turnover and rapid product development, you simply can't afford to ignore someone's first few months on the job. But if no one takes responsibility for this, it's going to remain broken. So whose job is it to fix this? Well, the answer is going to be different on each job environment. I'm going to give you 3 options. Option 1, it comes from corporate. While this might work well for smaller companies, it would be a nightmare for IBM to assemble and update programs from its ever-changing product teams. Corporate leadership can and does provide introductions to IBM's rich history, best practices, and organizational structure. But can the team focusing on broader company strategy really speak to the goals and daily motions of thousands of product teams? IBM's solution needed to be scalable, and this, frankly, is not. Which brings me to option 2. Here, individual product teams set up the time, conversation, and resources to prepare new recruits. With the teams responsible for the construction and upkeep of these programs, this is the ideal solution within IBM Design. But because the initial effort seemed daunting, this wasn't happening when I joined. And my guess is it's not happening at your company either. Setting aside the time and focus seems difficult amidst the varying product factors on each team. New hires join with short notice and have varying levels of product familiarity, not to mention you have your own job to do. Managers and teammates go through a constant guilt cycle, failing to prepare for newbie after newbie. As I'll discuss later, empowering recruits doesn't have to require crippling amounts of pre-work and planning, and a little bit of effort up front will pay you back tenfold. So, as people become busy, they tend to develop amnesia for the pain of their first few months. And preparing for newcomers is easily overlooked. And this gives newcomers a choice: accept their situation as inevitable or create a solution. When I didn't have the tools I needed to succeed on my new team, I built them myself. And you can too. Over the first few months on cloud, I identified a problem. The complexity of IBM's cloud products and the many teams it consisted of demanded a unified understanding across all team members. But as it stood, no existing process was in place to share this knowledge base. I found some pain points. New hires were feeling disconnected from their team's culture, had no single source of truth for understanding the team's mission, and had a fundamental lack of domain knowledge and the terms that the team was using. Determined to solve these problems, I and a teammate devoted a 2-week sprint to preparing for those joining Cloud only months after we did. Cloud's team had a little bit of a unique hiring process. And since there was an introductory IBM Design Bootcamp for college hires going on at the time, we knew we would be getting 5 to 10 of these designers joining our team and had a little bit of advance notice to prepare for them. This is where I first moved from me search, knowing this was a problem for me, to research, thinking about the trends and needs of others. While studying the essentials of new hire success, 3 core needs surfaced. New hires need inclusion on the team, understanding of the domain, and the ability to contribute. Together, these needs address the hopes and fears of those joining a new team. First up is inclusion. Newcomers want to be able to communicate well with their coworkers, but they don't instinctively know how to read each person. Indirect forms of communication in the workplace abound, and something as simple as saying hi to someone in the hallway can seem really intimidating. On top of this is something that we've all experienced when joining a new job called belonging uncertainty. Candace Morgan, the Director of Inclusion and Diversity at Pinterest, describes this as wondering whether you share the same core values as the company and team around you. On IBM Cloud, we tackled this by hosting games, gatherings, and happy hours that gave insight into each other's communication styles. Before their first day, we let the new hires know that they would have a getting to know you session that would happen the morning of their first day. Here, we gathered their new teammates that they would be joining for a rousing game of Pictionary and some pastries. Later in the week, we had a happy hour to celebrate our new team as they started to feel more comfortable. Creating situations like these where teammates can interact in relaxed environments helps them relate to their coworkers in their everyday work environment. The next need is understanding. Newcomers are aware they have a lot to learn. Having a foundational need of the problems you're trying to solve is key to adding value on any team. With complex products, the knowledge gap can feel paralyzing, and it can often take 6 months, if not longer, to know what you don't know. IBM CEO Ginny Rometty has described why bringing in new-collar workers, people lacking traditional degrees in a field, plays a huge role in filling the needs of the changing market and IBM's goal of restless reinvention. She says, as the market is changing, jobs are being created that demand new skills, which require new approaches to education, training, and recruiting. At IBM Design, this means while each designer is coming in as an expert in human-centered design and their craft, they're not always familiar with the product spaces they're entering. And although the knowledge gap might not be as steep on your team, understanding the domain is a challenge at any company. With an individual company and product come new flavors of terminology, corners of the market, and strategies. On cloud, we tackled this by bringing in subject matter experts to cover the basics of the domain. Although we knew new recruits wouldn't become experts from a few sessions, this helped them to start to wrap their heads around some more complex problems. Also, this gave them a contact in the speaker themselves for any questions that arose on the subject later on. We also created documentation with long and short form articles on the domain, a detailed glossary, and stories from coworkers to help cement these concepts long term. Providing these things as a jumping off point helped new hires get on their feet and gave them the ability to contribute from day one. Which brings me to my last need. Finally, the new hires need to be able to contribute. Knowing team cadence, tool usage, and communication methods are preparing newcomers for success. In the end, a lot of this has to do with clearly defining expectations. Newcomers aren't mind readers, and a lot of times we don't even know clearly what we expect from them until we define it together in a conversation. So on our team, we used workshops on the team's best practices, the products we're built on, and the tools we use to foster candid discussions amongst both the new hires and the teams. We also gathered the people they would be working with on a daily basis for an exercise called Hopes and Fears. Here, the newbies and the teams were able to verbalize their expectations and concerns for the new hire's new role using sticky notes. Some of the hopes and fears that were brought up in this exercise were people were hoping they would be able to create meaningful work, afraid the team wouldn't be a good fit, or that the domain would be too technical for them to keep up. So from here, we were able to have conversations that addressed these concerns and talked to the day-to-day expectations for the new hires' roles. Defining what you expect up front through conversation can help you prevent a lot of the need for damage control later on. As I wrapped up the first round, I brought in folks who had just gone through the program to help me think about how we could make this better for the next round. By talking about what worked and what didn't, we helped to improve for the next round of newcomers. When the next group did come, I took on more of a mentorship role in the planning process, sitting in on meetings to provide assets and plans that I had used to create the initial program, but encouraging this new group to take ownership over contacting the speakers, choosing the topics, and changing the activities as they saw fit. When I transitioned to a team outside of cloud, this group was prepared to independently run this program. They're about to start their 5th round of it and have made this so much better than I ever could have on my own. So that was a great story about the cloud team, but what does this look like for you? Let me start off by saying you don't need something fancy and time-intensive to make a big impact. I've seen a lot of people put this off because they think that they need to do something really elaborate. And after today, you can no longer use that as an excuse. Even lightly touching on these needs will make a world of difference. Inclusion on the team, understanding the domain, and the ability to contribute, they all apply to your team no matter the industry. Let me give you some low-lift ideas on how you can make this work for your team. For inclusion on the team, this can be as simple as gathering your coworkers to eat lunch together on the first day. Take some time to introduce them to each person on the team, sharing some nugget about the team's culture and shared history. Honestly, this is the fun part. Use this as an opportunity for the next happy hour or group gathering. Lots of pre-planning isn't required to make a newbie feel welcome, and a little bit of effort can go a long way on this one. For understanding the domain, I've seen this trip up a lot of teams because it can seem like so much ground to cover, but having to tackle this on your own can make a newcomer feel like they're not sure where to start. The phrase Google it isn't much help if you don't really know what you're supposed to be Googling. And that's why I love this next low-lift activity. You remember the earlier document that I showed you that had long and short form articles on the domain, a detailed glossary, and stories from coworkers? While that might seem like it'll take a lot of time, this next activity accomplishes the same goal in probably 5 minutes. So to start to chip away at the knowledge gap for your new hire, you can start by making a verbal team glossary. Gather your coworkers on the new hire's first day and ask them to each write down a few words they had wished someone had defined for them on their first day. Define them as a group in front of the new hire, and now they've got a verbal team glossary in 5 minutes. For the ability to contribute, I like to assign every newbie a forever buddy, providing someone who can answer questions that come up for them later on. Now that they have an ally on the team, it provides them a great chance to have team practices explained that you couldn't cover on the first day. Here's another easy option. Set up meetings on their calendar with people from across the disciplines on their team and give them a prompt, like, what were some of the features in our last release? Or what is your ideal interaction with other team members? Conversations like these get newbies an idea of what contributing in a day-to-day basis can look like on their new teams. So I established earlier that this applies to everyone in this room, both the teams that exist and the newbies who are joining them. In the ideal scenario, y'all are working together towards newbie success because that'll help you create team and product success. For the teams, I'll talk to you guys first. Someone needs to be your point person on this, to remind you of your team goals you're trying to accomplish and set the plans in motion to make this training happen. The manager doesn't have to be the point person on this, but they do need to provide support and resources for whoever is leading the charge. And for the sanity of the point person, I highly recommend that they team up with at least one other person for the planning process. This spreads out the burden and makes it sure that your everyday activities don't come to a screeching halt. Also, it's really great just to have another person's perspective on what could be a good process for the new person. I like to use this as a training opportunity or mentorship. Identifying someone who's recently come onto the team so they know what this process is like, or someone who's interested in team training and education. But don't stop there, get your whole team involved. Make your objectives clear and delegate the processes along the way. And you also don't want your newbies to be super spoon-fed. So how do you start them on a path towards solving their own problems once the onboarding is over? You can reinforce this expectation by building tasks into the onboarding process. And this can be as simple as giving them assignments, something as small as having them prep a list of questions they have around their new role, or something larger like creating a sitemap of your existing product. As an additional bonus, a lot of times they'll come back to you with fresh perspectives you would never have seen on your product otherwise. All right, for the newbies. So earlier, I described the ideal scenario where a team is planning for you before you join. In reality, you don't always get this ideal scenario. I can't tell you how many people have come up to me shocked that nobody's even told them where their desk is, much less explained what the product is to them. Joining a team that's unprepared for you can feel really disorienting, but when you're joining a team that wasn't that prepared, you have to make a choice about how you're going to handle it. You've heard the phrase, God helps those that help themselves. Well, theological implications of the statement aside, the same concept can apply to newbies. Studies have shown that proactive new hires are more likely to receive help from their teams. Taking a proactive approach can help you transform resignation to empowerment. As you, as a new hire, gather and document resources for your own understanding, you're helping to pave the way for the next newbie. And that's a beautiful thing, using the efforts of a few to help many. When you're being proactive, tell your new team, I'm working towards this activity and goal. Do it and check in with them along the way to make sure you're on the right path. So I'm going to give you some practical examples of how I've done this for myself. When I joined my new team, I went through old presentations and versions of the product, writing down the questions and summaries of what I found. Then I took this to my design lead and offering manager, giving them pinpointed time to answer my questions. Not only did this make it less intimidating for them to answer questions that could have taken hours otherwise, but it also gave me valuable insight into the product that I was trying to build. Also, even though it's not required, I always try to join my developers' scrum calls in the morning. This is something where they say what they've done the day before, what they're planning to do today, and any blockers they have that are standing in their way. This gave me insight into the production flow and helped me avoid ways that I could be a blocker for them in the future. So, in addition, when I'm in meetings with colleagues, I ask myself, what do they value and what are they being evaluated on, so I can understand their concerns, motivations, and opinions. This leads to way more productive conversations because when I know what they really want, we can come to a solution that works for both of us. Also, it builds trust that can last for later on. So earlier, now that I've talked to the newbies and the teams, in the earlier study that I showed you, I talked about a unique situation we had on the cloud where we had multiple people joining with a little bit of time in advance to plan. In this next case study that I'm going to show you, we had the opposite scenario, with one person joining with just a few days heads notice. So through time box planning efforts, my colleague Jose Paez and I used minimal lift for high impact. On Thursday morning, Jose and I were told that a visual designer, Raquel, would be joining the Watson education team the following Monday. With the mission of setting up welcome and orientation activities, we met for a quick brainstorming session. As I kicked things off, I told Jose the 3 core needs I had identified for the new hire success. I explained that with these principles as the experience foundation, new hires are empowered to hit the ground running. As Jose and I began to sticky note, we discussed our desired outcomes for Raquel's first week and how to ground each activity in these 3 tenets. For each event, we asked ourselves, what is the goal here and who needs to be here to make it happen? As we thought about how to include Raquel on the team, we considered the team members she would be interacting with on a frequent basis to accomplish her daily goals. While her design lead and offering manager were co-located with her in the Austin design office, most of her development team was located on the East Coast. With this in mind, we crafted ways for Raquel to interact with both of these groups through happy hours in person with the Austin team and video calls with the East Coast development team. We also brought in Raquel's manager and design lead to help us test our assumptions about what she really needed to succeed and pass off specific events to them and their immediate team members. With our quick agenda decided upon, we set things in motion. At 9:30 on Raquel's first day, we gathered the team together for a donut supplemented icebreaker. Before we met, Jose had printed out strips of paper with sentences on them for each member to complete. As a team member introduced themselves, they drew a sentence out of the mug. Then they had to finish it. For example, one of the sentences was, if our team was a vehicle, it would be a blank. All the banter that followed served to accomplish our goal for the meeting, allowing our newbies to observe their coworkers' communication style and humor in a low-stakes environment. Next, we scheduled some time with one of the design team members to take her through the existing product. This took about 10 minutes max, but it gave her an opportunity to orient herself and ask her initial questions. Next, Raquel's design lead took some time to sketch out our team's organization chart, showing her who was connected with our product. This gave Raquel context for the meetings and phone calls she would be in with people she wouldn't meet face-to-face with for quite some time, so she could remember the perspective of each person who's coming in. After that, Raquel's design lead set up a video call with her remote development team. I can't stress enough how important these video calls are, especially for someone's first few days on the job. Seeing the faces of her development team gave her valuable nonverbal cues and helped her build rapport with them for future work. From across time zones, they discussed the team processes and current goals. Raquel's next day started off with a conversation with her offering manager and design lead around what was expected for her role. Before the meeting, we asked her to bring in a set of questions that she had to start off the conversation. Later, we gathered the team together for a discussion around the broader products on our Watson education platform. Here, she got an idea of how she could get feedback and inspiration from the other products that we have on our team. At the end of the week, we gathered the gang together for a happy hour, celebrating Raquel's joining our team. You'll notice that I was hardly in any of the pictures that I just showed you because although Jose and I organized the schedule, we delegated most of the events to other members of the team to disperse this load. The outcome was that Raquel felt welcomed onto the team, knew where she was starting on the product, and what was expected of her. And it can be as simple as that. And you can remember that it took probably 30 minutes or an hour for Jose and I to plan this initial thing end to end, and I'd say that this was a pretty great return on investment for that meeting. So, of course, this was a really specific example for the team culture that we had and the individual that we had just gotten onto our team, but this can be applied in so many different ways. Inclusion on the team, understanding the domain, and the ability to contribute can look different on your team, but still meet the needs of your new hires. I'm not gonna be able to cover this full spectrum right now, but I do wanna cover a few of the edge cases for you guys to consider. So first off, how does this work for remote team members? Again, video calls are your best friends on this one. It helps you with inclusion and clear communication. When I've had developers joining our team remotely, and after video calls on the process, not only they, but other remote team members have reached out to me on how valuable this was to them. I also like to send out care packages. I'll steal swag from around the studio and have each team member write a note in a notebook on something they love about our team or a way that they're excited about this new team member to contribute. So also something for you to remember is that you've got a unique individual with their own personality, culture, and background. You should ask yourself, how can this be applied for the new person you're getting? What might be great for one person might make another person feel super uncomfortable. Take, for example, something that we did for our new team member, Raquel. So since she was joining us from another team within IBM, we knew she had this fantastic tropical shirt that she kept in the office. So we covered her desk in print to match. We knew Raquel was super outgoing and the life of the party. But what if Raquel had been uncomfortable being the center of attention? This could have made her feel out of place and embarrassed. Luckily, we had had a chance to see Raquel's sense of humor ahead of time, and she loved this. But how do you prepare for somebody you've never met? Sometimes you can draw on this from the interview process, but when I have someone who's a little bit of a wild card, I like to play it on the safe side. So I'll have a team gathering at the beginning of the week and make sure they meet everyone, but I like to get their input on how they want to interact with the team. Take happy hours, for example. What if someone doesn't drink or can't eat donuts because of a gluten intolerance? Instead of making them feel pressured into something they're uncomfortable with on their first week, I like to give them a choice. I'll say to them towards the beginning of the week, so on Friday, we're gonna have some sort of an event to celebrate that you've joined our team. Would you prefer a lunch at Taco Deli or a happy hour at Gloria's? This gives them a little bit more agency. And although you should be introducing them to everyone at the beginning of the week and making them feel welcome, sometimes it's nice to have your bigger social gathering towards the end, because by then they've had time to feel comfortable with their team before they have to gear up for a big social outing. Something else to keep in mind is not just your company culture, but the culture at large in different countries. I love this example from one of the IBM design studio leaders from Shanghai, who told me about a problem they'd been having. So in America, brash question asking is usually kind of admired, but that's not true in every culture. He told me that the newcomers that had been joining their team weren't speaking up about the questions they actually had. So to solve for this, they started putting every new hire's desk by a whiteboard and telling them to write the questions they had there. Then their coworkers from around the studio would come and write answers to those questions throughout the week, along with tips they had about the studio or fun facts. Then they would turn and introduce themselves to their new teammate. And I just love the creativity they used here. This is a great example about how the principles of inclusion, understanding, and contributing can work in any environment. And you can figure out what works for you there. Lastly, you're gonna need buy-in from decision makers. How do you do this if you're not the manager on your team? First off, I'd start off by telling them why the new hire training is important. Employee retention and job fulfillment is a huge part of this. On the first team I talked about, Cloud, we had horrible attrition rates with people leaving every few months. Although there were a couple other factors involved, after implementing the onboarding program that we got started, there's been hardly any turnover since the past year. So I think that's a great point to make. Also, when people become more integrated into the team, they produce better work. Talk to the decision makers on your team about the difference it'll make to prove that it's worth the investment. So in summary, you can apply these things to any company, any dynamic, any industry. Inclusion on the team, understanding the domain, and the ability to contribute are universal needs. And I can't wait to see how you'll use this on your teams and how creative you can get with it. And remembering that it can just be a little bit of effort to go a long way on these things. Because I've witnessed the difference these efforts have made for myself, my coworkers, and product teams across IBM Design. In the end, setting newbies up for success creates open communication, efficient teams, and better products. And who doesn't want that? So if you want more resources on this, I've written some articles on Medium. Please reach out to me on Twitter, via email, use the hashtag #HowToHelpTheNewbie or #HelpTheNewbie to get the conversation going on this. And I would really love to get the chance to learn from you and how you're going to work with this in your environments. So with that, let's take some Q&A. And there's a microphone right over there for anyone who's got a question.
So you gave some great examples for onboarding individuals, and I loved these. My question would be, do you have any ideas or experience on how to do that at scale? So for example, as part of an acquisition?
Ooh, that's a great question. At IBM, we've had a lot of acquisitions with a lot of companies that have had a really strong team culture, and that can be tough to feel like this other culture is coming in and trying to dominate you or take that away. Even one of the places we had acquired had they gave away free tattoos for their employees. So people had the old brand tattooed on their arm. This can be a tough situation. I would recommend going in and building trust as the number one thing you can do. Having conversations with people to kind of break down that barrier, getting some inside jokes with them. Those are the steps that I've taken when I've been working with teams on an acquisition, because they already come in thinking, we know how this should be done. And when you come in and have a conversation with them and say, I'm trying to figure out what your concerns are, what perspective you bring, I think that goes a long way. In terms of a scale of a program, if you're gonna experiment with that, I would love to see how it goes, because there's some fun ways you could do it. All right, next person.
I have a question about handling kind of introverts and when they don't necessarily vocalize when they're lost or don't understand what's happening and they kind of internalize that. And then when do you decipher in that 3 to 6 months what's teachable and when they're just not the right fit for the culture?
That's a great question. So to address the first part of that, with introverts, I would say this is a good practice just for any person, whether you think they're an introvert or not, because a lot of introverts feel like they have to pass as extroverts. So you might not always know instinctively what someone is. I would say that the manager or someone kind of a little bit above them on the team should have meetings with them the first day that they join the team, and then continue that each week and for the first couple months that they're on the team. That way they can start to ask some of the questions and say, how are you fitting in? Or do you feel like you're able to contribute? Is there anything where you just feel really lost? I think some of those one-on-one interactions can really help when somebody isn't quite comfortable with speaking up in front of a large group. And then your second question was when somebody's not a great fit.
For culture.
Yeah. So I think part of what I would say for that is if you feel like somebody is either not taking initiative, is not a great culture fit, at first would try talking to them one-on-one and asking them, kind of letting them inside and kind of act like you're inviting them into the picture. Like, these are my goals for you. This is where I can see you going with your potential, and kind of give them a challenge of, these are the things that I would like to see from you. And then if they don't follow up on that and they don't take the action plan that you guys have put together, that's when I'd start reevaluating, is this person really a good fit? They're not really stepping up in the ways that we've discussed in a smaller situation where we've clearly defined what is needed from them. And that's kind of when I would start to evaluate whether they might not be a good fit for the company.
Thank you.
Awesome.
You mentioned the one-on-ones almost every week. I'm just going to give my perspective, and I'm waiting for a reply from you. Is one-on-ones every week with even a new person for 6 months, it's like holding hands. It does not promote any type of initiative, and they tend up to respect that, and you can only do it with so many people if you have in a team. Is there any other ways, or do you have a better formula to, how do you discontinue them? How do you promote initiative more than anything?
Great question. So first, let me kind of define what I mean by one-on-one. So this can be as simple as just having, a 10-minute meeting to check in and say, what have you been working on this week? How are things going with your coworkers? And I think up front, when they first join a team, those should be more frequent. But at the 6-month mark, you might not have time to meet with them every week, or it might be causing that sort of a, codependent relationship. So at that point, you can start to space them up and have one-on-ones every month or something like that. And I think that those types of communication, anything you can use to clearly define what are the goals they need to be hitting. So that can be by just setting a list of goals for them at the beginning of the week, or asking them to come up with goals. Those types of things are good initial steps, and then you can kind of wean them off as they become more self-sufficient. Or if they're not becoming self-sufficient, make that one of their goals. Say, this is what I want to see from you. Let's see how you can step up in this way. So, here you go.
Hey, Allie. First of all, thank you for your time. Great stuff. A couple questions from my side, from coming from a company of similar size and spread across the country. I think it's a very personal, switch over to onboarding that you're giving us today. How do you find a way not just to scale that, but to really implement something like this that feels so personable and so human? I mean, you don't want to shove it down someone's throat, but at the same time, how are you tracking to make sure this kind of stuff is actually happening across teams and not siloed?
It's a great question. So this initially started for me kind of as a guerrilla effort. I saw a need. There was a more extensive onboarding program around IBM best practices that was going on, but once people got onto their teams, I saw this just kind of fall flat, and people were feeling disillusioned and not sure where to break into their products. And so I realized I've got to do something here for my specific team, and then I've been slowly sharing it with other teams. In terms of how a company does that from a broader scale, I think a lot of that looks like talking to the decision makers. So having training sessions for the managers of teams, or when people are about to join a team, give them an expectation set. So I think that looks like a lot of workshops that you can have with concentrated groups of people who can then scale this out and make sure that you've clearly distilled what are the goals for you in this, and then they can relay that on to the rest of the people. But I do think it has to be a little high touch initially to kind of indoctrinate people with this is doable, this is why it's important. Because I think that in the end, if you get one person who is really fired up about onboarding, they're better equipped to go to 2 or 3 people and get them fired up, and it can kind of work like a chain reaction like that. So,
Awesome. Thank you.
Hello, thanks for the insight. I want to get your opinion about the level of difficulty for the first assignments of a newcomer. I've actually worked in teams that they would give a very difficult first assignment to see if the person can swim and kind of force them to understand the system, and also in teams that the first assignments were easier so they can ease into getting the big picture. What's your take on that?
So my take on it is to kind of, I think probably for the first day, I wouldn't send somebody into the middle of the battle on their first day because they're taking in a lot of things. But as time goes on, I think it depends on what stage you are in the onboarding process. During the first week, I like to give them something that's pretty manageable. That's probably more just my leadership style, is that I think that trying to trick people into performing is not really effective in the long run. So I would say to give them something manageable and keep scaling them up to something, or kind of give them an expectation. I know that this is a little bit more difficult, so you might expect to run into some pushback on this. Give them an expectation up front if you are going to give them a more difficult task. That's my take.
I also agree, by the way. I think giving some small wins in the beginning help boost how they feel in the team.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you all so much. It's really been a pleasure to talk to you, and please reach out to me. I would love to hear what this looks like on your teams, and to share any resources I can with you. And with that, have a great South by Southwest. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.